All right, so I am going to give you my numbers-based response. I didn't feel this way kind of going into it, but after I did a statistical analysis, analytics kind of analysis of it, Michigan has 3 big games, right? So early in the season they've got Texas, middle of the season they've got Oregon, and at the end of the season they have OSU. The hope is that they're going to run the table on all of the other games, the other 9 games. Now, is that possible? I think realistically, in my analysis, I did say that basically it would be 0.8 losses out of those 9 games. So that doesn't sound that great. It's not quite 1 loss, but it's closer to 1 than 0. So there may be a hiccup there. I would say the hiccup might be that Washington game. They're going to the West Coast. It's they are going to be favored by a lot. But I have an uneasy feeling about a game on the West Coast, Michigan traveling, kind of a part of the way through the season here. It feels like a game that they could potentially lose. I hope I'm wrong, but that's
game.
Yeah, that's what I'm nervous about, just because of the travel.
Washington's gonna be poverty fairs. Washington's gonna be poverty.
All right, well,
they got new coach.
We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
All right.
I'm just worried about sort of the circumstances in the schedule. Now, in terms of the most important game of the season, certainly most people would think, okay, it's got to be Ohio State. But because of the way that we now have a 12-team playoff, if you look, I'm taking emotions out of it. I'm going to say this in a way that's probably going to be emotional to some, or emotional response to some, but I believe that the game is really more of just a game from a statistical standpoint. Michigan, assuming they do run the table, they don't have that hiccup. They don't have the hiccup with Washington. Maybe a hiccup with, or a hiccup with USC. That's the other game I was going to point out that could be a hiccup. If they don't have a hiccup with either of those, they run the table with those 9 games. They would have maybe 2 losses, maybe 1 loss, or 0 losses. Now, realistically, if they have 2 losses, they pretty much have to beat Ohio State to make it. So then it does become important. But they kind of, they used up all their mulligans. That was their safety net last way in to the playoffs. Now the Texas game, it's early in the season. Is that the most important game? Well, if they beat Texas, they have an inside track to the playoffs. They have an inside track to win the, not only get in the playoffs, but win the Big Ten or get to the Big Ten title game. So there's that. But if they lose the game, it's just a mulligan. It's almost like a mulligan. They can make up for it by winning the Oregon game.
Right.
And if they go 1-2 in those 3 games, they run the table and everything else, I think they're in the playoffs as a 10-2 team. If they go 9-3, I think it's less than 50% chance, probably closer to 1-3 chance that they make the playoffs. So given all that, regardless of whether they win or lose against Texas, if they can win that Oregon game, that is the most important game of the season. It's a night game. It'll probably be a maze out. If I were to go to one game, that would be the game. That is the pivotal game in the season, November 2nd, Oregon Ducks. More important than Ohio State, more important than Texas. That's what the numbers say, and I'm not going to get emotional about it, and I'm going to say I agree with the numbers. That is the game we need to win in order to make the playoffs, or to take it even the next level where we say, hey, we're going to win. We're at least going to get to the Big Ten title game.
So, let me let the viewers in on. For those who might not know, Ferris is our analytics analyst. He's a numbers guy. So, that's the approach he takes on a lot of things. And definitely, I think that perspective is extremely valuable to our channel. And so for anyone who's like wondering, well, why is he's like unemotional and it's strictly a numbers thing for him? Well, because that's Ferris is a numbers guy. That's his approach to things. So a lot of people, and probably including myself, will say, well, Ohio State's the most important game, because my argument would be, Ferris, say we lose to Texas and Oregon. Let's just say hypothetically. As long as you beat Ohio State, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? And now your argument is, well, if we beat a Texas or an Oregon, we have a mulligan to lose the Ohio State game. That's your argument, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Right.
it either gets you in the playoff hunt, or it gets you to the even higher upper tier. We're going to even get a bye hunt, depending on what happens between those two games, right? So,
Yeah. No, I think I think both arguments are sound, because at the end of the day, it comes down to you can only afford 2 losses. The game you lose isn't necessarily, but I mean, obviously, it's not quite that cut and dry. There is some gray area, because what if you say you lose to Oregon and Oregon actually sucks? They won't, but hypothetically, right? So I hear you, Ferris. I think your argument's sound in reason. I think, but I mean, I will just say, I think Ohio State's still the most important game, because, and I'll say this too. So if I could rank it, I would say Texas is least important because it's a non-conference game. Now, obviously, it might be one of the most impactful because it's so early in the year, and that's a major prime time matchup, and it will really set the tone for the season. And obviously, we want that victory, and I think we can get that victory. I'm optimistic Michigan can win. I think people are not looking at what Texas has lost, but this isn't a Texas debate right now. So I would go Ohio State, Oregon, Texas in terms of priority. That would be kind of my ranking. What about you, John?
Yeah. So I think that we're coming at this from the angles of, are we looking at, the games that'll give us a buffer to get through the season, or are we looking at historical, or like how are we analyzing this? I do think that there is something to be said for setting the tone early. Beating Texas with Quinn Ewers coming back, I understand they've lost a lot on defense. I get it. But they are preseason ranked number 2 in ESPN FPI, I believe 2 or 3. They're very highly ranked. Joel Klatt has them, I think, top 2 or 3. There is a perception there where Michigan kind of needs to beat them in order to be seen in people's eyes as a top 5 team. And then on top of that, I do think that trickles over a little bit to the College Football Playoff Committee, because they're watching these games too. They're people. Yeah, they've got various amounts of experience in football. But I just think that beating Texas would set the tone early for the rest of the season, right? And maybe if you drop one like against a USC, it's not going to be seen as unfavorably. If you've also lost the Texas game on top of that, then Michigan's in danger, right? Because then, oh crap, you got to run the table, because I don't think Michigan or anybody really is getting in at 9-3 unless they do something crazy like beat a top 2 or top 3 team that they're not supposed to beat or something like that.
Yeah, the only way Michigan gets in as a 9-3 team is if all 3 of the other 3 teams, OSU, Oregon, and Texas, are all in top 5, maybe top 4, something like that, where in OSU, Oregon play each other. So I would see that as difficult. I think the loser of that game is going to slip a couple spots.
Yeah, and we are going to, by the way, see, stay tuned at the Voice of College Football, because we are pretty pumped about some of the upcoming crossover content, and hopefully we'll all be on each other's shows. We have a weekly Texas show. We have an Oregon show here at the Voice of College Football, and I'm looking forward to having some discussions. TJ's already had a debate with Matt Miller, the host of Horns Huddle. So that was just the beginning of some of the crossover content that we're going to be doing. Sounds like we all had different answers. Like all of us had different answers. I said Texas. TJ, you said Ohio State. Ferris, you said Oregon. I will say I think Ohio State, from an emotional, a historic perspective, it is still going to be the best rivalry in all of sports from a ratings perspective, the amount of money it generates, and my other evidence just being look at every single chat in the Voice of College Football Network. If it's a USC show, if it's an Oregon show, whatever, you get Michigan, Ohio State back and forth. I mean, you don't get that with Alabama, Auburn. They're not fighting with each other in the Voice of College Football chat. So I know that's not a very scientific look at it, but
well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Well, first, I'll just kind of close my final argument with Michigan's a 9.5-point underdog to OSU. So the statistical argument factors that in that, hey, that's a very low probability. You are totally on thin ice. If you lose the other two games, you're pretty much very high probability, 25% chance or less that you're going to win that game. High probability you're going to lose that game. So, that's sort of factored into the analysis. I think we win that Oregon game, we feel pretty good. But let me ask you the question about pretty good about at least making the playoffs. Let me ask you the question in basketball. Do you care as much about Michigan beating Michigan? I'm not even going to think about Ohio State because to me, Michigan State is the arch rival. Do you care about sweeping Michigan State, or would you rather have Michigan get to the Final Four, but maybe they get swept by Michigan State? You know what I mean? So that's the kind of thing we're going to have to start thinking. Our mindset's a little bit different. Do we want to make it further in the tournament?
You take that because you're the b-ball guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Ferris is right. I'd rather make it to the Final Four and get swept by Michigan State. But I don't know. I hear the argument, and I guess we're gonna have to experience it to see. But I don't know, man. I don't know if. I mean, look, would I rather lose to Ohio State and win a national title, or make it to the Final Four in college football? Shit. Yeah. I think I would. I would rather. I want another natty, dude. It means more. I mean, it's more important. I wonder. We're definitely have to make a poll question in the coming weeks on what people would rather. Maybe closer to the season, we'll do that. But yeah, I mean, I guess you're right, Ferris. But I'd rather just do both. How about that?
Fair enough.
Fuck Ohio State and give me a national title. That's what I'm going for.
Yeah, that's a tough question, and I there are a couple of Buckeyes in here. What did you think in 2022? Because you were in the situation in 2022 where Michigan took you to the woodshed at Columbus, but then you had the opportunity to sneak into the playoff and were a midnight kick away from probably beating TCU and winning a national title. How would you have felt? Because that was pretty close to happening. I think Ohio State would have had TCU, honestly.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you this. I mean, just I know a lot of Ohio State fans they would take that, and they were happy as hell to get in the playoff, man. After they lost to Michigan, so many Ohio State fans were like, all right, what are the chances we get in? What are the chances we get in? And a lot of them were like, oh, it's not going to happen. And then when they got in, they were happier than hell, man, which I understand. Like, there's no slight against that. We would be too. But I'm just saying, like, I do think the rivalry means everything. And this is kind of like where people think the rivalry might be getting watered down with all these games and the expanded conference and the expanded playoffs. I think that bye weeks and home field advantage in the playoffs are going to mean a lot. And that rivalry is going to be a big reason why someone might get a bye or might get home field advantage in the playoffs. I still think the rivalry is going to mean a lot. I don't think it's going to lose value, but I do understand. I am understanding the argument of college basketball gets swept by Michigan State, still make it to the Final Four. I don't know. I think college football is just a little different, but I guess we're just going to have to see.
Okay. Just quick side note here. I just looked up the prices. Get in the door price for the Oregon game and the Texas game. Texas is hovering around $500 a ticket. Oregon's only at, I say only, it's only at $200. So, just a little tip here. If I were to choose one of those two games to go to, I would go to the night game Oregon.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So,
well, Roy says let's win them all. So let's just win them all.
That's the
Why
only
not?
way.